At the will reading, my daughter-in-law locked me in the laundry room. Only family is allowed. I don't want you making a scene. The following week, all the assets were sold by the mysterious heir. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd spend my husband's funeral week locked in a laundry room like some unwanted guest. But there I was, 69 years old, listening through the thin door as my daughter-in-law Serge read Harold's will to what she called the real family. Only family participates. Darla. I don't want you making a scene, she'd said, her Irish accent sharp as broken glass. Then she literally pushed me into the utility room and turned the lock. The humiliation burned worse than the arthritis in my knees as I pressed my ear to the door. 43 years of marriage, and I wasn't considered family enough to hear my own husband's final wishes. I could hear Noel's voice, my only son, agreeing with everything Saoirse said. Mom gets too emotional about these things, he told the lawyer. It's better this way. Too emotional. About my husband's death, about being excluded from decisions that would shape the rest of my life. The lawyer's voice was professional, distant. The primary beneficiary of the Harold Mitchell estate is designated as... There was a pause, papers rustling. The mysterious heir, as specified in the sealed portion of the will. My heart stopped. Mysterious heir? What mysterious heir? When will we know who that is? Saoirse's voice had changed. Sharper now, almost panicked. The identity will be revealed according to Mr. Mitchell's specific timeline and conditions. Until then, the estate remains in trust. I sank onto Harold's old fishing stool, the one he'd used to change light bulbs around the house. My hands were shaking. Harold never mentioned any mysterious heir to me. In 43 years, he'd never kept secrets about money or family matters. Or had he? The voices grew muffled as they moved toward the living room. I caught fragments, something about liquidating assets quickly, about me being provided for in a small apartment somewhere. Saoirse's voice carried the authority now, making decisions about my life like I was already dead. When they finally unlocked the door, I was sitting exactly where Saoirse had left me, hands folded in my lap like an obedient child. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. Well, that's settled then, she announced, her pale blue eyes avoiding mine. The house and most assets go to the heir once they're identified. Until then, we'll manage everything. We? I asked quietly. Noel stepped forward, and for a moment I saw my little boy, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. But his eyes were cold now, calculating. Saoirse and I will handle the estate. Mom? You don't need to worry about complicated legal stuff. Complicated legal stuff. My husband's will. My home of 4 decades. I think I have a right to understand what Harold left for me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Saoirse laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. Oh, he left you something all right. A small provision. Enough for a nice little apartment in that new senior community downtown. Very practical. The words hit me like a physical blow. Harold, my Harold, had relegated me to a small provision while leaving everything else to some mysterious stranger? I don't understand, I whispered. It's simple, Saoirse said, already turning away. Harold was thinking clearly about the future. Young families need resources more than, she gestured vaguely in my direction, more than people in your situation. My situation, being widowed, being 69, being unwanted. That night, alone in the house that might not be mine much longer, I sat in Harold's chair and tried to make sense of it all. The mysterious heir haunted my thoughts. Who could it be? Some distant relative? A charity? Someone Harold felt deserved our life's work more than his own wife. I picked up the photo from our wedding day, both of us so young and full of dreams. Harold's smile was the same one he'd given me just last month when I brought him tea in his workshop. How could that man, my Harold, have planned to cast me aside? But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, too tired to turn on the lights, I realized something else was bothering me. Something about the way Saoirse had handled everything, the way she'd seemed almost prepared, like she'd been expecting this moment, planning for it. The question that would haunt me for weeks was already forming. If Saoirse was so surprised about the mysterious heir, why did she seem to know exactly what to do next? The for sale signs started appearing the very next week. I woke up Tuesday morning to find strangers trampling through my rose garden, measuring the front yard. Saoirse stood on the porch directing them like she owned the place, which apparently she might as well have. "What's happening?" I asked, still in my robe, clutching my coffee cup. "Estate sale preparation," she said without looking at me. "We need to liquidate assets quickly. The mysterious heir situation makes everything complicated, so we're being proactive." Proactive. That was Saoirse's favorite word. It usually meant she was about to make my life more difficult. "But this is my home," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Technically, it belongs to the estate now," Noel said, appearing beside his wife. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're just trying to protect everyone's interests." "Including mine?" Silence. By Thursday, they'd tagged half the furniture with little white stickers. Harold's antique desk where he'd written me love letters during his business trips, the dining room set we'd bought for our first anniversary, even my grandmother's china, the set Harold had always said would be mine forever. "You can't take everything," I finally said, watching Saoirse label my jewelry box. "We're not taking anything, Darla. We're preparing for the eventual transfer to the rightful heir." She held up my pearl necklace, the one Harold gave me for our 20th anniversary. "These might have significant value. Those are mine. Harold gave them to me." "Actually," she said, consulting a thick folder, "according to the estate inventory, all jewelry acquired during the marriage is considered marital property, which now belongs to the trust." I stared at her. "You've been planning this. I've been preparing for contingencies. Someone has to be responsible." The way she said responsible made it clear she didn't think I qualified. That evening, I tried calling my old friend Margaret, but the phone line had been disconnected. When I asked Noel about it, he said they were streamlining services to reduce estate expenses. "Use your cell phone," Saoirse suggested helpfully. I didn't have a cell phone. Harold and I had never needed one. By the weekend, I was completely cut off. No phone, no internet, no car. Noel had taken Harold's truck for safekeeping, and my old sedan needed too many repairs to be worth maintaining. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Sunday morning, I walked to the corner store for groceries, something I hadn't done in years. The owner, Mrs. Chen, seemed surprised to see me. "Darla, I heard about Harold. I'm so sorry." Then she lowered her voice. "Is it true you're selling everything?" "I'm not selling anything," I said. "Saoirse and Noel are handling the estate." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, became careful. "Oh, well, if you need anything." But I could see it in her eyes. She thought I was losing my mind, talking about my son and daughter-in-law like they were strangers making decisions without me. When I got home, Saoirse was showing the house to a young couple with a baby. She introduced me as Harold's widow, who will be moving to a lovely senior community soon. The woman smiled sympathetically. "It must be hard, downsizing at your age." I wanted to scream that I wasn't downsizing anything, that this was all being done to me, not by me. But what would be the point? Who would believe that a son would treat his mother this way? That night, I lay in bed listening to Saoirse and Noel in the kitchen below, their voices carrying through the old house's thin floors. "The appraisers finished the jewelry today," Saoirse was saying. "More valuable than we thought." "Good. The sooner we get everything liquidated, the better." "What about her?" A pause. Then Noel's voice, harder than I'd ever heard it. "She'll adjust. She always does." She'll adjust. Like I was a piece of furniture being moved to storage. I pulled the covers over my head, but I couldn't block out the sound of my own son talking about me like I was already gone. The mysterious heir had become a convenient excuse for them to take everything that mattered to me. But lying there in the darkness, I started to wonder about the timing of it all. How had Saoirse known exactly what papers to file, which lawyers to call, how to freeze accounts so quickly? And why, if they were truly surprised by the mysterious heir clause, Did they seem so confident about what would happen next? Something wasn't right. Harold had been sick for months before he died. Plenty of time for conversations I wasn't part of. But conversations with whom? And about what? The questions multiplied in the dark, each one more unsettling than the last. 3 weeks after Harold's funeral, I found the first clue by accident. I was cleaning out Harold's workshop, one of the few places Saoirse hadn't invaded yet, when I knocked over his old toolbox. Screws and washers scattered across the concrete floor, and underneath them, a manila envelope I'd never seen before. My name was written on it in Harold's careful handwriting. For Darla, open only if something happens to me. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a business card for a lawyer I didn't recognize, Thomas Brennan. Estate planning, and a handwritten note. Darla, if you're reading this, ask Tom about the Sunflower Trust. You are not what they'll tell you that you are. I made sure of that. All my love, H. The Sunflower Trust. Harold used to call me his sunflower because I always turned toward the light, even in dark times. I stared at the note until the words blurred. Harold had planned for something to happen to him. He'd created some kind of trust, and he'd hidden it from everyone, including me. But why the secrecy? I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket and walked back to the house, my mind racing. Saoirse was in the kitchen, talking on her phone in rapid Irish to someone, her voice agitated. She switched to English when she saw me. The buyers want to close by next month, she said to whoever was on the other end. We need to finalize everything before complications arise. Complications. Was I the complication? That evening, I waited until Noel and Saoirse went to bed, then crept down to Harold's old desk. Saoirse had been through most of the papers, but she'd left his address book. I found Thomas Brennan's office number and memorized it. The next morning, I told them I was walking to the grocery store. Instead, I walked 12 blocks to a payphone outside the old drugstore downtown. My arthritic fingers fumbled with the coins as I dialed. Brennan Law Office. This is Darla Mitchell. I think my husband Harold was your client? A pause. Mrs. Mitchell? Yes, I've been wondering when you'd call. Can you come in today? An hour later, I sat in Thomas Brennan's small office, clutching Harold's note. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Harold came to see me 8 months ago, he said gently. He was very specific about his instructions. He said if anything happened to him, his family might try to complicate things for you. What kind of complications? Thomas opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Harold created the Sunflower Trust specifically to protect you. He was quite concerned about your daughter-in-law's influence over your son. My heart stopped. He knew? He knew Saoirse had been pressuring Noel to consider your future finances. Harold overheard conversations about senior communities, about liquidating assets for the family's benefit. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of. I thought about all those evenings when Harold would disappear to his workshop after dinner, claiming he needed to fix something. Had he been planning this instead? The will that was read at your house, Thomas continued, that was the public will. Harold filed a separate sealed trust document that supersedes it. You, Mrs. Mitchell, are the mysterious heir. The room spun. I'm what? The Sunflower Trust makes you the primary beneficiary of Harold's entire estate. The house, the savings, the investments. Everything belongs to you. The public will was designed to protect the trust from being contested. I couldn't breathe. But Saoirse said, they said Harold left me a small provision. That was a decoy. Harold suspected they might try to manipulate the situation, so he created a paper trail that would make them think they were in control while the real assets were safely protected for you. I stared at him, my mind reeling. So the house is mine? The house is yours. The bank accounts are yours. Even the items they've been cataloging and preparing to sell, all yours. But they've been treating me like I'm nothing, like I have no rights. Thomas's expression darkened. That's exactly what Harold was afraid of. He said Saoirse had been studying estate law, asking questions about inheritance rights. He suspected she was planning something. My hands clenched in my lap. How long have you known? I was required to wait 30 days after Harold's death before revealing the trust. He wanted to see how they'd behave without oversight. Thomas leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, have they been pressuring you to sign anything? Any documents about moving or transferring property? I thought about the papers Saoirse kept bringing me, always when I was tired or upset. Guardianship papers, I whispered. She said they were just precautionary, in case I needed help with decisions. Thomas's face went white. Mrs. Mitchell, if you'd signed those, they could have gained control over all your assets, even the trust. Harold specifically warned me about this possibility. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance. They'd been planning to steal my independence, my very right to make my own choices. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thomas smiled grimly. Now we let them know exactly who the mysterious heir is. But as I walked home that afternoon, my mind wasn't on revenge. It was on something else entirely. If Harold had suspected Saoirse's plans 8 months ago, if he'd been careful enough to create this elaborate protection, what else had he known? And more importantly, what else had Saoirse been planning that I still didn't know about? The envelope in my pocket felt heavier with each step home. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every whisper from Noel in Saoirse's room sent my heart racing. I kept touching the business card in my nightstand drawer, making sure it was real, that I hadn't imagined the whole conversation with Thomas Brennan. By morning, I'd made my decision. I had to confront them, but they confronted me first. Darla, we need to talk, Saoirse announced over breakfast, her tone businesslike. She slid a thick stack of papers across the table. The estate situation has become more complicated than we expected. I stared at the documents, afraid to touch them. What kind of complications? The mysterious heir clause is causing delays, Noel said, not looking at me. The lawyers think it might be contested. We need to protect your interests. My interests? Saoirse's smile was sharp as a blade. These papers ensure you'll have immediate access to your inheritance, regardless of what happens with the main estate. But we need your signature today. I picked up the first page, my hands trembling. The legal language was dense, confusing, but I caught enough words to understand. Transfer of decision-making authority, incapacity provisions, financial guardianship. This says you want to control my money, I said quietly. It says we want to protect your money, Saoirse corrected, from legal complications you wouldn't understand. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was Harold's voice in my head, or maybe it was 43 years of being underestimated finally catching up with me. I understand more than you think, I said, pushing the papers back across the table. I understand that you've been planning this for months. I understand that you locked me in the laundry room so I couldn't hear what was really in Harold's will. And I understand that you're lying to me. Noel's face went pale. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. I stood up, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I know about the Sunflower Trust. The silence that followed was deafening. Saoirse's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Noel's mouth fell open. I don't know what you're talking about, Saoirse said finally, but her Irish accent had thickened, the way it did when she was nervous. The trust Harold created 8 months ago, the one that makes me the primary beneficiary of his entire estate, the one that makes me the mysterious heir. Noel stood up so fast his chair fell over. That's impossible. Is it? Harold knew Noel. He knew what you two were planning. He heard your conversations about senior communities and liquidating assets. He created the trust to protect me from you. Saoirse's mask finally slipped. Her face twisted with fury. You manipulative old woman. You think you can just waltz in here and claim everything? I'm not claiming anything. It's already mine. It always was mine. We've been managing this estate for weeks, Saoirse screamed, her composure completely gone. We've invested time and money and effort into protecting these assets. Protecting them for yourselves, you mean? Noel stepped between us, his face red with anger. Mom, you're being ridiculous. Dad wouldn't have kept something like that from us. He kept it from me too, I said sadly. But he knew I'd need protection from my own family. The words hung in the air like a curse. Noel flinched as if I'd slapped him. We are your family, he said. But his voice was weak now. Family doesn't lock family in laundry rooms. Family doesn't try to steal inheritance through guardianship papers. Family doesn't treat family like a burden to be discarded. Saoirse suddenly lunged for her purse, pulling out her phone. I'm calling our lawyer. This is fraud. She's mentally incompetent, trying to invent trust funds that don't exist. Call him, I said calmly. Better yet, call Thomas Brennan. He's Harold's estate attorney. The real one. I watched the blood drain from both their faces as the reality hit them. All their careful planning, all their manipulation, all their cruelty. It had been for nothing. Worse than nothing. They'd revealed exactly who they were for assets they never had a right to claim. You don't understand, Saoirse said desperately. We need this money. Noel's business is failing. We have debts, obligations. That's not my problem. He's your son. My son died the day he locked me in that laundry room, I said quietly. The man standing here is a stranger who happens to share my DNA. Noel's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the little boy again, the one who used to apologize for breaking things, who cried when he stepped on bugs. Mom, please, we can work this out. We can be a family again. No, I said, and the word felt like freedom. We can't. I walked toward the door, then paused. I'll be meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to discuss what legal options I have regarding the attempted guardianship fraud and the unauthorized sale of my property. I suggest you contact your own legal representation. Where are you going? Saoirse demanded. Home, I said. To my house, to my life, the one Harold made sure I'd still have despite your best efforts. As I reached for the door handle, Saoirse played her last card. If you do this, you'll lose Noel forever. You'll die alone, with no family, no one who cares about you. I turned back one last time, looking at my son's face, seeing the weakness there, the willingness to let his wife speak for him, to let her make choices that hurt his own mother. I've been alone for years, I said. I just didn't realize it until now. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. But as I walked down the street toward Thomas Brennan's office, I realized something that made my blood run cold. If Saoirse had been studying estate law, if she'd been planning this for months, what else had she discovered? What other schemes had she set in motion that I still didn't know about? The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Thomas Brennan's office felt like a sanctuary. I sat across from his desk, watching him review the guardianship papers Saoirse had tried to get me to sign, his expression growing darker with each page. Mrs. Mitchell, if you had signed these, they would have gained complete control over your finances, your medical decisions, even your living arrangements. They could have committed you to a facility against your will. My hands trembled as I reached for my teacup. How is that legal? It's not, when it's obtained through deception. This constitutes elder abuse and attempted fraud. He looked up at me. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Before I could answer, his secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Brennan, there's a Saoirse Mitchell here demanding to see you. She says it's urgent regarding the Mitchell estate. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Send her in. This should be interesting. Saoirse burst through the door like a woman possessed, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. Behind her, Noel followed reluctantly, his shoulders hunched in defeat. You can't do this, Saoirse said, pointing an accusing finger at me. She's manipulating you. She's old, confused. Harold never would have cut out his own son. Mrs. Mitchell, Thomas said calmly. I'm afraid you're mistaken. Harold was very clear about his intentions. He specifically mentioned his concerns about your behavior toward his wife. Saoirse's face went white. What concerns? Thomas opened Harold's file. Let me read you something Harold wrote in his own hand. Saoirse has been pressuring Noel to convince me to put Darla in a home. She's been researching my financial assets and asking questions about my will. I'm afraid she's planning to isolate Darla and take control of our estate after I'm gone. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched my son's face as the reality of his wife's manipulation became clear. For the first time in years, I saw shame in his eyes. That's not true, Saoirse whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Harold also documented several conversations he overheard. Thomas continued. including one where you told Noel that, quote, the old woman won't live forever, and when she's gone, we'll inherit everything anyway. We just need to speed up the process. Noel stepped back from his wife as if she were radioactive. Saoirse, tell me you didn't say that. She looked trapped, desperate. You don't understand. We have debts. Your business is failing. We needed options. You needed my mother to die? Noel's voice was barely a whisper. I never said that. You said we needed to speed up the process. Thomas read from Harold's notes. What process would that be, Mrs. Mitchell? Saoirse's composure finally shattered completely. She doesn't deserve it. She's just one old woman. We have children to think about, a future to build. She's lived her life already. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. I had known she disliked me, but this was pure hatred, cold and calculating. Noel sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Oh God, what have we done? We? Saoirse turned on him viciously. This was our plan, Noel. Don't pretend you weren't part of it. I thought we were just helping Mom transition to a smaller place. I didn't know you were planning to... He couldn't finish the sentence. To what? I asked quietly. What else were you planning, Saoirse? She glared at me with pure venom. You want to know? Fine. I've been putting sleeping pills in your evening tea for weeks, making you seem more confused, more fragile. I've been telling your neighbors you're showing signs of dementia. I've been setting up a perfect case for incompetency. The room spun around me. The exhaustion I'd been feeling, the mental fog, the way I'd been second-guessing myself. It hadn't been grief or age. It had been poison. You've been drugging me? Just mild sedatives. Nothing that would really hurt you. She said it like she was explaining a minor household adjustment. Thomas was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the police. This is criminal assault. Wait, I said, surprising everyone. Before you do that, I want to know something. I looked directly at Saoirse. The mysterious air clause, you knew about it, didn't you? Her silence was answer enough. Harold told you, didn't he? He tested you, wanted to see what you'd do if you thought someone else was inheriting everything. Saoirse's laugh was bitter, broken. He called me into his workshop a week before he died, said he'd changed his will, that there was a mysterious heir who would inherit everything. He wanted to see if I'd still take care of you out of the goodness of my heart. And instead, you decided to steal what you thought was my small inheritance and try to gain control over me completely. I decided to be practical. Harold was a fool, giving everything to some stranger while his real family struggled. I am his real family, I said firmly. I was his wife for 43 years. You're nothing, Saoirse screamed. You're a pathetic old woman who wasted her life playing house while real people built real futures. The mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating predator underneath. Even Noel was staring at his wife in horror. Thomas, I said calmly, please call the police. I want to press charges for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and assault. No! Saoirse lunged toward me, but Thomas stepped between us. Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise you to leave now and contact your own attorney. As Thomas made the call, I looked at Noel one last time, my son, who had chosen this woman over his own mother, who had been weak enough to let her poison me, manipulate me, try to steal my independence. I loved you, I told him simply. I would have given you anything you needed, helped you through any crisis. All you had to do was ask. Tears streamed down his face. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was... Yes, you did, I said sadly. Maybe not all of it, but you knew enough. You knew she hated me, and you chose her anyway. You knew I was being treated badly, and you let it happen. Can we fix this? Can we start over? I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in months. The fog in my mind was already clearing as the drugs worked out of my system. Some things can't be fixed, Noel. Some betrayals are too deep. As the police sirens grew louder outside, I realized that Harold's final gift hadn't just been financial security. It had been the truth about who truly loved me and who had been using me. The The revelation was devastating, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden watching the sunflowers Harold had planted bloom for the first time since his death. The police had arrested Saoirse for elder abuse and attempted fraud. The charges were serious enough that she'd accepted a plea deal rather than risk trial. Noel had filed for divorce within weeks of her arrest. He'd come to see me once, broken and ashamed, begging for forgiveness. I'd given it to him. Forgiveness was for my peace, not his. But I'd also made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. Some bridges burn so completely that rebuilding them would require tearing down everything that came after, I'd told him. I've built a new life now, one where I'm not afraid, not diminished, not invisible. He'd cried then, understanding finally that his choices had consequences that stretched beyond his marriage. The house felt different now that it was officially, legally, indisputably mine. Thomas had helped me understand every detail of Harold's trust. My husband had been more clever than I'd ever imagined, protecting not just my inheritance, but my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live my remaining years on my own terms. I'd found his journal in the workshop, hidden behind his old tools. Page after page of observations about Saoirse's behavior, documentation of her attempts to isolate me, records of conversations she'd had with Noel about my deteriorating condition. Harold had seen everything, planned for everything. But the most precious entry was the last one, written just days before he died. Darla doesn't know how strong she is. She spent 43 years being my partner, taking care of everyone else, putting herself last. If something happens to me, she'll discover she's been a warrior all along. The Sunflower Trust will give her the resources, but she'll provide the courage. I have no doubt she'll bloom again. I'd cried reading those words, not from sadness, but from recognition. He'd seen in me what I was only now seeing in myself. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Chen from the corner store holding a covered dish. "I brought you some of my famous dumplings," she said when I opened the door. "And I wanted to apologize for before, when all that trouble was happening. I should have trusted my instincts about you." "What instincts?" "That you were being mistreated. I could see it in your eyes. But I thought family business wasn't my business. I was wrong." I invited her in for tea, and she stayed for 2 hours, sharing stories about her own family struggles, her own moments of having to choose between keeping peace and standing up for herself. By the time she left, I realized I hadn't just gained vindication, I'd gained a friend. The invitations started coming after that. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years began including me in their activities. The local book club invited me to join. The community garden asked if I'd help teach their sunflower cultivation class. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Word had gotten around about what had happened, and instead of seeing me as a victim, people saw me as someone who'd fought back and won. The story had stripped away the careful facade Saoirse had constructed, revealing the truth not just about her, but about me. I wasn't the confused, fragile old woman she'd tried to paint me as. I was a 69-year-old woman who'd survived 4 decades of marriage, raised a child, worked part-time jobs to help support her family, and managed a household with competence and grace. When threatened, I'd been resourceful enough to uncover the truth and brave enough to act on it. The transformation in how people treated me was remarkable. The bank manager who'd barely acknowledged me when Saoirse and Noel were handling my affairs now stood when I entered his office. The postal clerk who'd grown used to delivering certified letters from lawyers now smiled and asked about my garden. But the most significant change was in how I treated myself. I'd started taking art classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I'd joined a traveling group that took day trips to museums and historical sites. I'd even signed up for a cruise next spring, something Harold and I had always talked about, but never done. Every choice was mine. Every decision was mine. Every day was mine. Last week, I'd received a letter from Noel. He was in therapy, he wrote, trying to understand how he'd allowed himself to be manipulated into betraying his own mother. He'd gotten a job in another state, was starting over. He didn't ask to see me, didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything except my knowledge that he was trying to become better. I'd read the letter twice, then filed it away. Perhaps someday we'd find a way to have some kind of relationship again. Perhaps not. Either way, my happiness no longer depended on his choices. This evening, as I watered Harold's sunflowers in the golden light of sunset, I thought about the mysterious heir who'd caused so much trouble. She'd turned out to be exactly who she should have been. A woman who'd spent her life earning love, loyalty, and security through genuine care and commitment. Harold's final gift hadn't just been financial. It had been the revelation of my own strength, my own worth, my own right to a life lived on my own terms. The sunflowers turned toward the dying light, just as I'd learned to turn toward joy instead of obligation, toward peace instead of conflict, toward the future instead of the painful past. At 69, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. The person whose approval I needed most was my own. And for the first time in my life, I had it completely. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.